and welcome to Art for All, the Sketchbook School podcast. I'm Danny Gregory, and I am the founder of Sketchbook School. I'm also, an artist and a writer and a prestidigitator. Not actually a prestidigitator because I'm not quite sure what that is, but I would like to be one. Speaking of, here's my pal, John Muir Laws.
Hi, I'm pal John Muir Laws. I am a sketching scientist, wildlife biologist, and avid advocate of journaling and time in nature. And Danny's buddy.
There you go. Yes. So what we do on this podcast, if you're new to it, and even if you're not, is we pick a subject and then we try to adhere to it as we have a conversation about it. But we may tend to stray far afield. And in fact, we have often not managed to tackle the subject at all. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes today. We have a subject which we are fond of. I also wanted to tell you at the beginning of this episode that this is the end of the season that we've been calling the Curious Sketchbook. We've done, I think this is the 23rd episode. Is it possible that we've done that many?
Wow.
But
that's pretty cool.
So. I think so. I think it is or maybe it's the 20th. Anyway, it's been a lot. We've had a lot of conversations. So we've basically spoken for we have spoken for a full 24 hours.
And that's pretty good with no coffee. Just
pure, whatever it is, pure. I don't know. I've been drinking water. Chutzpah. Yes. Chutzpah. So we've been mansplaining for a full day, and now we are moving on. So, all right. So today's subject is healing. The healing effects of art. Can art heal us? And, I think I like to believe that it can. Jack, what about you? Do you believe it can?
I like the way that you said that. You said, I like to believe that it can, because that leaves room for us to be wrong. And but my personal experience is that when for me, most of my artwork is kind of coupled with an experience in nature. And I think that the two of those together are a really powerful 1-2 healing balm. And but I don't have a data set, but it'd be fun to kind of unpack what our experiences are and what we've seen with others in exploring art and exploring art in nature as ways of recovering from trauma of any kind.
Yeah, I think I don't know of any studies that have been done. I think there have been studies done on meditation, so it's possible that there's some connection there. But I think anecdotal information does it for me. I'm not necessarily always a data guy, so I think that I know from my own personal experience that art making has helped me to gain perspective, has helped me to de-stress, has helped me to get through some tough times. I think looking at art is the other aspect of this. Can looking at art also help you to heal? And I think that that's another component of this. In fact, there's the Metropolitan Museum in New York has a new podcast, which the name of which I can't think of at the moment, but we can probably put it in the show notes. But it's entirely about the healing aspects of art. So yes, and there are lots of different each episode is a story about people who, often through the collection of the museum, have found solace, have found perspective, and I think that that's interesting that an institution like that decided that that's an important message, because I think that we don't think about that enough. I mean, and usually when I mention healing to people, they say, "Oh yeah, art therapy." And I'm not talking about art therapy specifically. I mean, art therapy is, I'm sure, a great thing. I've never experienced it, but I what I'm talking about is something different, which is how um, going through the steps of making art can change how you feel. I think it's that simple, and I think that feeling can apply to healing. It can also apply to literal healing, like healing from a disease. I think it can help you to perhaps have a different outlook, perhaps to have to detoxify sort of mentally in some ways that can help in healing. But I don't want to go that far down that road because I don't have a lot of personal experience with that.
Mhm.
So, but I think that, have you ever had an experience like this? Have you ever had an experience where you were, for instance, under stress or something else like that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that was what I wanted to sort of talk about first. My kind of the thing that really brought me to nature journaling, the time I really started to dive into it was in high school. And that was a time of really, really high stress and anxiety for me. And my I would during the day I would check out by just kind of going into this doodle space in the margins of every page, every book, every piece of paper that I had, and and that would kind of hold me through um, I, until school would end, and I could go grab my nature journal. And on the way home, instead of going directly home, I would arc into Golden Gate Park and roam around and explore and look at birds and draw plants and try to find cool things going on. And that was my way of getting through that time. It's tough being a high school kid, and it's tough being an awkward high school kid. Um, but I know that for me, that art was a deliberate practice that helped me cope.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of teenagers are drawn to art, possibly for that reason, unconsciously. As a source of giving you control. I think that's another thing. I think even going back to when we were small children, I remember my son drawing like giant like battlefields with like thousands of like little guys, with weapons, all like huge armies of people. But I think and I always thought like that's interesting. Like he's created a world that's entirely his world that he can make and do stuff in. And I think that that's part of the process when we're kids, of kids who generally don't feel like they have much control over the world. You can make a world, right? You can take a piece of paper
Mhm.
and you can make a world, and you can make people happy if they aren't happy. You can make them clear if they're confusing. I think from the very beginning, using drawing as a way of making sense is very sort of natural. And right, so I think that, and I think using drawing to think things through, right? Using diagrams, which are a form of drawing, right? Using putting stuff down on paper in order to see it. That's not essentially healing, but it is still a way of using drawing to help us with our psychological states, and that is something. Again, my concern about this area is that I think because a lot of people, most people, don't think they can draw, right? I can't draw a straight line. I can't draw a stick figure. That whole thing. They deny themselves tool, this tool that will help you to impose order, will help you to relax, to um, you know to heal. So I think that that's a shame because my sense is that making poor art, making bad art, is just as effective in its healing and meditative and sort of control features as making great art is. Like you don't have to do an incredible drawing to still be able to have those internal processes. The ability to focus, the ability to get into the flow state. All those things have nothing to do with whether or not it's a good drawing. And if we deny ourselves the ability to use these tools because we think it's not going to be any good, that's a shame.
Yeah, I tend to stay away from those terms: good, great art, bad art, those sorts of things for exactly the reason that you described. I think that you were um, I don't think you're saying like, oh, that's bad art over there. But what we often will think, sometimes in our heads, we'll tell ourselves like, oh, this isn't really representative, therefore bad.
Right.
Um, and so, I'm guessing that you're not saying that is, if something that is not representative, then it is in some way bad. But you're using that to sort of describe the mental state in our head of when we say like, oh, I'm not good at art. I can only do I can't do those sorts of great things yet. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's
so,
exactly what I do mean. It's
yeah,
like it's
yeah,
if
we're
you're
totally on
if
the
you're
same page here.
yeah, if your feeling is I'm not going to draw because it'll be bad, then you're missing out drawing, and you're also missing out the benefits of it because it really has nothing to do with that. And I think if you look at a little kid doing a drawing and getting lost in that moment or feeling like this gives me perspective, again, the quote unquote goodness of the drawing has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and I think you articulated really well, both sort of the benefits of the what and the how. So on the what side of this, you can be drawing in ways that express your feelings. If you're feeling really angry about something, you can create drawings that can come out in a way that is not hurting somebody and also helps you um, kind of get clear, like, wow, look at what's coming up in that. Um, so expressing feelings, and also clarifying thinking. You talked about making diagrams and pictures that just help you kind of go from a state of confusion to clarity. When you get ideas out of your head and onto paper, you're better able to wrap your head around these things. And as part of that, if you're using pictures, that helps you kind of go in a direction that is different than if you're just writing in a diary. They're both good. I'm not saying don't write in a diary, but I'm saying that the drawing the pictures and the doodles and the things that come out of that have an added. It's a yes and sort of thing. And then you also talked about just how being involved in that process helps you kind of drop into a flow state and find calm. And completely aside from what the content of the art is, that process of making art can focus your mind. And then the that that chatter of all the little problems jockeying for attention can be kind of placed aside as your brain is able to focus again on whatever phenomenon or process that you're engaging with. And that, for its own sake, is really useful. For me, that's a big part of it. When I'm feeling stressed, sometimes my wife says, "Honey, I think you need to go grab your journal and just go for a walk." And so I'm going to get a little bit of exercise. But the idea of, she's not saying just go for a walk, but she's saying grab that journal, because if you go out and you draw something, your mental state is going to change. There's sort of a stillness that you can find that I find hard to access in other ways.
Yeah, it gives you literal clarity. It gives you distance and it gives you literal clarity. Distance because the flow state kind of changes your perception of time. So,
Yeah.
whatever mood you were in, there's sort of like a hiatus, and then it's unlikely you're going to pick it up exactly where you dropped it. But I think also, yeah, perspective, because while you're drawing, other parts of your brain are doing other things. I think a very simple thing to do: put on a piece of music, pick up a pen, and make marks.
Hmm.
Right?
Yep.
And try this as an experiment. Just take uh, 4 pieces of music and make a playlist on Spotify or whatever. Completely different kinds of music. Take something really fast, take something really calm, take something really emotional, take something that's really upbeat and fun, and then take a pen and a piece of paper and let the playlist play, and then just see what your hand does. See what your hand does to express how you're feeling, and let it just jitter and dance and play around. Just something as simple as that can also function in this way. But then to do a drawing where you are focused on a thing, and for instance, take the palm of your hand and try drawing the tracery of the lines. Just take, don't draw your fingers, just draw the little lines that go across your palm, and just try and draw each little one, and draw it and then do the next one and the next one. So you're drawing a shape, you're observing, you're looking, and you are slowly in that flow state. Take your time. And again, that's the kind of drawing that, like, it can't be wrong. Like, nobody's ever going to say, well, hold on a second, you missed that little line. No, it's just like it's just a little thing to look at. I like to take a piece of
Ooh.
toast and draw every little crumb. Draw one crumb, draw the crumb next to it, draw the next hole, just draw your way slowly across a piece of toast. Really calming, sort of meditative kind of way of doing things.
And then if you get a crummy drawing, that's actually the point.
Well, then you can toast your drawing. Exactly.
There we go. There we go. Oh, and then you're out of a jam. Not to
Exactly.
butter you up or anything.
Oh, all right. Enough dad jokes for
Enough
one
of that.
episode. But yeah, so I think things like that, where it's not representational, so you don't have any of the judgment issues going on, and that kind of thing. I mean, I also have done things where I've drawn without a pen. Where you go through the motions of drawing, where you're looking at something as if you were drawing it, but you are not actually putting pen to paper. So you're still tracing around it. You're looking at each of the details. You're doing all the things you would do if you were drawing it, but you're not drawing it. So that's another way, I think, of having sort of non-judgmental art experience.
Hmm.
Um, but also when it comes to nature, I mean, taking a leaf and doing that with it, drawing negative space is another thing. Just draw the sky around the clouds. Just little things that are just calming and sort of like little puzzles to work out. Um,
One of the things we do when we are in a really um, agitated mind state is what's called rumination, where you just are kind of just reworking and stressing about the same idea. If you are, what it's hard to sometimes get an adult to lay on their back and look up and find animals in the clouds.
mhm.
But if you were to look at those same clouds and just sort of trace the negative shapes of them, and to to do that, you can't ruminate at the same time as as doing that, because it takes so much of your mental resources to kind of go into that negative shape and try to connect the motions of your finger. We don't have the bandwidth to do that, and um, to be ruminating. So it's a very effective way of turning um, of, of 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 changing your mind, changing your state of mind.
I mean, I've been in situations where a loved one was in the hospital, and you go and you're sitting by their bedside, and you want to
Yeah.
be present, but maybe they're napping or they're not available to you at that moment. Um, and you can still be present, because I think that's a lot of what your being there to support your loved one is about. It's like, I'm here for you. I'm literally here. I'm not on Facebook. I'm here for you, with you. And drawing can help you do that. So you could sit there with a sketchbook and you could draw the tangle of wires coming out of the monitoring equipment by their bed. You could draw the folds of the blanket on their bed. You could draw them if you feel up to it. But you can just, again, be present, and your drawing will give you a calming energy. It will also help you to get through the time. I mean, I
Yeah,
think about how
that's
many
right.
situations you're in that are potentially very stressful because you're doing nothing and you feel out of control, right? So, being in a waiting room at a hospital is a classic example of that. Waiting for a plane that's delayed, sitting in the airport, and you don't know how long it's going to be until you can board. So, you can use drawing again in this situation to just get through this time by doing something. Draw. I mean, if you feel capable of drawing another passenger who's sitting and they're on Facebook, draw them. Draw the plane outside the window. Do things that will help you be present, but without being anxious about that presence.
That's right. And you've got a choice then of either some people will often do something to check out in that time. So I'm just going
Right.
to go on my phone, or here's this little word game that I have on my phone, or I'm going to check my texts and I'm going to reply to those. And you can keep yourself busy. Um, so we'll use those things as a distraction from the moment we're in. I know that when my when I was at my um, my mom's bedside in the last um, few months of her life, the energy that I brought to the room, if I had my laptop,
Mhm.
was different than if I brought my sketchbook. And one was to check out, and the other was to tune in.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah. Your sketchbook helps you to see what is happening, you know,
That's right.
and be engaged with it, but also without the space for your mind to draw all kinds of conclusions from what you're experiencing. That was my experience when my first wife had, her accident that left her paralyzed. To me, that was a huge mental space to develop theories about the future, and to think endlessly about what would be. All fantasy. It's all fantasy. Any vision we have of the future is just a mental concoction because we don't
Mhm.
actually know. But we do know about the present because
That's right.
we're in it, right? So if your sketchbook can help you to anchor it and to say, you know what, I'm here now. Maybe things will change. Maybe they'll get worse. I don't know. Maybe they'll get better. I don't know that either. But I can be here now. I can lend my support, but also I can see what actually is. And seeing what is often makes it bearable. Even if it's terribly dire, it can make it bearable.
That's right. To the idea of not to hide from that moment, but to be there as fully as you can. Um, I don't think of that. The journal then is not, it's not a distraction, um, but an invitation to remain there. You're saying, but I can't ruminate about these things while I'm doing that. Well, that's right. But I think that sometimes the feeling we have of active rumination, we feel like, it's very, very stressful. It's very, very engaging, and we can get the subjective experience that equals really vividly experiencing the moment. Um, but I think that is actually that's more of that's a distraction. Um, that kind of wallowing in the rumination. It's not being present a productive way. I'd say is often not being present in a productive way, um, and it feels, but it's got the subjective feeling of like I'm really here and I'm really engaged in it, but I'm really just sort of cycling the same sort of thoughts and ideas and through my head again and again and again and again, instead of helping me be, as you said, in that in that place right now and paying attention to that moment.
Yeah, I think that's what you need, and I think that's who the person you're supporting needs. I mean, I think back at the beginning of the pandemic, that was a really stressful time for everybody, of course. We had no idea what was going to happen. That was what a lot of it was. Like, what is going to happen? How long will this last? What will the effects of it be? Is this the end of the world? I mean, there are all kinds of thoughts that we could easily have, and I found myself doing a lot of journaling, but not written journaling that much. I didn't find written journaling was helpful because my experience of written journaling in really times of stress is they can, rather than diffusing your anxiety, they feed it. They can feed it. They
Hmm,
can feed it because
that's interesting.
because your thought process on paper builds. This could happen, and that could happen, and this could happen, and that won't happen, and you can go through this whole sort of stacking of anxieties. Whereas if you can look at the world, and that's what I was doing at the pandemic. I was saying, you know what? I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know what is happening. Like right now, I don't have COVID, nor does anybody who I love. I'm here. I'm safe. I'm able to look at my environment, and I don't know how long I'm going to be here, how long I'm going to be stuck in the house. Well, that could feel really claustrophobic and anxiety provoking. Or you can say, let's see what is now, what is here, what is this, what is my environment, what are the opportunities here for me to entertain myself, for me to anchor myself. How can I interact with the other people around me? All these kinds of things, they're present, or how can I also maybe not think about it at all, but just
Hmm.
be here in the moment, and be calm, be present, be okay. And I can think about that other stuff later on. I personally have always found meditation to be almost impossibly hard because my brain just won't stop until I'm drawing. And then when I'm drawing, all these other processes fade away. And I'm just here now using most of my brain to just observe and record. And that's really um, you come away from it feeling like you've broken the cycle.
It's it's really interesting to me that your experience of writing things, you find, kind of stacks pressure and stress up. That is that's different than my experience of it, which I guess is why having these conversations is so useful, because we find that there's just so many different people. Um, the the a, a, a route or a process might work for one person but might not be the key for another. My experience with writing has been that it really helps me to be able to clear my mind. I start with just sort of, I've got these feelings of just floating anxiety, and then if I can articulate those onto paper, instead of just being these feelings of dread or out of controlness, those then they can sit on the piece of paper and I can look down on them. I can see them and kind of go like, okay, so that's what it is, and then here's the next thing, and that's what it is. And that, for me, I find that very freeing. It helps me able to see them, to bound them, and then to be able to move on from that. So my experience isn't so much that it's this stacking of those things, but more of an articulation place. That journal is a place to articulate all those just feelings that I'm having, what's behind those, and then when they're daylighted, they're not as fierce, and that helps me then be able to um, so for me it's a positive experience using the writing, but I find that when I'm drawing, it's it's a different experience. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but they're both really useful in different ways of of being present and engaging with whatever is going on. And sometimes I don't want to draw, and sometimes I don't want to write. And fortunately, when I don't want to draw, writing's there. And sometimes I don't want to write, drawing's there. Um, and they work in such just different ways.
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying it, I'm thinking to myself, there certainly are times when I need to write.
Mhm.
If I wake up in the middle of the night and I have an idea that is grinding in my head, I mean, sometimes like a good idea, like, hey, it's a good idea. But sometimes just like an anxiety, dark scenarios. Um, in that situation, getting it out on paper gets it out of my head. I
Mhm.
agree with that. I agree with
Mhm.
that. But I'm thinking if I was sitting in a hospital room with somebody and I was writing how I was feeling then, I don't think it would be helpful. I think it would exacerbate it.
Mm.
So I don't know if I mean, because I could be writing like, she'll be okay, it'll be okay, the doctor's going to come. I mean, I could write all that kind of stuff. I don't think that that would help me. So I'm trying to think of what is the difference. Is the difference that you have a situation where you really have no control? And so you're trying to exert control over it by hypothesizing that maybe in that situation, that's different than coming up with a solution to a problem. I don't know.
Yeah,
As I'm saying it, I'm still not sure what I
yeah,
think.
and I think that sitting there writing, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Um, those aren't the things which we should be saying to ourselves or the other person. I think that because um, because we don't know, right?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
denial. That's
and
denial.
yeah, and but I think being to say like I I have fear about this, right, is different. And saying that I remember this thing that we did together and this moment. It's crazy that I'm thinking about this now, but wasn't that fun? Or wasn't that amazing that we got through that? And just letting that moment get down on paper. There's a memory that burbles up. I'm gonna capture that. There's a fear that I have. I'm going to capture that. So being present with those as they come by. Um, for me that's a useful process. But I agree that to sit there and then sort of tell myself on paper, it's going to be okay. This is going to be fine.
Or
Um,
alternatively, it's not going to be okay. It's going to be terrible. These horrible
yeah,
things are going to happen.
yeah,
I
that's
can't
different
imagine
than
that that could be helpful.
that's right. But yeah, that's right. And if you're there and you're drawing the tube,
Mhm.
um, you are what you're in a space right then of this is, and I'm here too.
Right.
And that's really powerful. That's powerful, that's useful, and I think it's healing.
Is writing harder to anchor yourself in the present with?
Ooh,
I mean,
I guess that'd be so situational to the person and the experience. um I found for me that the I would find myself drawing my mom's hand, or and then around that would be these sort of little kind of captured ideas and thoughts that would float through. um,
would you write those down on your page?
those are written down on the page as well.
Right.
And that it was just sort of this, it was an experience capture system, and it helped me. That's so different than like I'm going to be in the room with you, but I'm going to check my email because there's a lot of email, right?
Right. So maybe that's the point, is that you can engage in what's going on. I mean, you can engage by talking, and so often when you listen to people in hospitals, they're not talking about the present. A lot of times they're having small talk, and
Mhm.
it's like, again, that's another form of distraction. I mean, it's fine. I think you want to normalize things. But I think if you're sitting there and you're with your sketchbook on your lap and you're drawing and you're writing, it's very different than if you're trying to be not present by watching TV or reading the newspaper or just, you know, whiling away the time.
That's
So,
right.
which isn't to say that, I mean, it may be too much. It may be like, I don't know if I could sit there for 8 hours doing that. I,
That's right. We're not saying you're doing it wrong when you're hanging out with your friend in the hospital.
right, exactly.
Um, the but these might be interesting things to explore and see they how they connect with you in those sorts of experiences. Um, there's there's another there's another aspect to this that I think would be kind of fun to or interesting to look at, um, and that is directly using a, a journal and art, or in my case, art and writing, as a way to direct attention directly towards the source of of trauma that you've experienced, as a way of understanding it and helping you move through that. In thinking of this, I'm thinking in particular, um, to I have a friend who is developing all sorts of resources to go into communities that have been traumatized by wildfire,
Mm.
and using a process of nature journaling, that is, direct in these in burned areas, to process what happened, to look at it, and then to and there's she's developed, ways of thinking about how do you engage with fire in fire landscapes before, during, and after fire in a way that's sort of trauma informed, um, to help people be in the place that they are, to pay attention to that, and to use that as a way of, in one case, preparing, and in another case, responding to, and in another case, healing from the the impact of those wildfires. Um,
That
and
seems tough, because that means, is that about focusing on the present? Because I imagine if my house had just burnt down and I was using my art to focus on that loss, that would seem very difficult.
um, yeah, sort of in the face of the sort of an immediate fire, sort of during, in the during, obviously your first priorities are, getting everybody safe,
Mhm.
and taking care of those sorts of needs. But then, how are you going to how do you how can you pay attention, um, to the world when there is an active fire? um, is it's powerful. It's useful. I've also been in the field with her, and we've gone into places where native people are working with foresters to do controlled burns, in areas, and we're looking at those places before, during, and after fire. Um, so, in addition to these trauma informed experiences, um, that is sort of framing fire as this tool and a part of the landscape as much as rain is. Um, the And so what I find interesting about that is that there it is going, embracing the source of the trauma as a tool to work through it and come out the other side, as a way, instead of um, kind of moving away from that. I've recently been invited to go um, do some nature journaling at a VA hospital up in Oregon, and I think there, kind of the approach which we're going to be taking towards helping people who have been um, experienced trauma in combat and other really challenging situations is, it's going to be different from that, um, the approach with the fire. I don't think we'll be directly engaging with the source of traumas, but instead trying to go out into wild places, into nature, and focus our attention in that as a form of healing. But it's just interesting in my head, the contrast of those two approaches. Both, I think, have their real place and are useful, but just how interesting, how different those are.
Well, I wonder if there's a difference between you're in the middle of a traumatic event, right? You're in the, say your community was destroyed by a fire. You're in the middle of that event, and now you're going to have to deal with what's to come, right? That's one thing. Another form of trauma is something happened to me in the past that I've lived through and I'm still alive, but I'm still haunted by that experience. It's still part of me. And, is the art that you might, is the sort of healing that you need to have done in the first case is how do I kind of calm myself and focus myself so that I can deal productively with what's to happen and also acknowledge that I don't know what's to happen, but I can build it. I can make it. I can have some control over that part of it. I can be, I have to be present in order to make clear decisions. Um, and I don't want to be so freaked out by what's happened that I can't function. That's one thing. Whereas when you have a trauma in the past that is still feels present, maybe art making can help you to gain a focus on the present that says, these are the things that are positive. These are the ways in which I'm strong. These are the ways in which I have control and I can proceed in my life and perhaps ultimately, diminish the effect that past thing had on me. I don't know if is that a different thing? I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but it seems like it might be. Like when I think about things that have happened to me in the past, how I feel about them now is pretty different than how I feel when I'm in the middle of a trauma.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
right? When I'm in the middle of a trauma, trying to say I have no idea what's going to happen, as opposed to that thing is still here. I think they're different needs, but I think the tools can be the same. I mean, I think you could create versions of stories about the past that allow you to have control over them. So you can tell the story of your trauma, could be one way of dealing with it. Another version of it could be, let me talk about the present or let me paint a picture of the future, and have control over that. So again, similar to the way a child might uh, construct their own reality in art, you can have that as a tool as well. So, right. So I don't know. I feel like I've experienced all these things, but I don't know that I've necessarily fully analyzed how they function. But maybe,
And maybe
maybe
that's
somebody's listening to this can tell us.
the place for people who actually deal professionally with art therapy,
Yeah, yeah,
sort of intentionally, deliberately using these tools with what is the state of the art of understanding how we respond to trauma and can rebuild in the aftermath of a
yeah.
traumatic
I mean,
event.
I feel like in some ways I'm not. I don't in any way pretend to be qualified to give people art therapy, but I can say from my own experience that having art as a tool or as a weapon has allowed me to live less in my mind. It's allowed me to live in the present on paper. And I think it goes back to the Buddhist thing of all there is now. And we have to be as present as we can. And that art making definitely allows you to do that. Definitely helps you
True.
to do
True.
that, to be here now. And pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Suffering comes from the meaning that we put onto pain, the descriptions that we make of a future that we don't know about, the analyses we do of things in the past that may or may not be correct. But being present and saying, this is what's going on with me now, I think allows you to make a more finite thing in which to deal with. You don't have to deal with everything that ever happened and ever will. You can be present now. And that isn't to say you won't need to deal with the future. You will. You may need to make plans for the future, but it's very difficult to do that if you are overwhelmed and terrified or depressed or all those kinds of things. Whereas if you have some clarity, it's easier to make plans.
Unwilling to pay attention to the present, which is
Right,
about to
escaping it.
be the
Yeah,
tool that you need to make those plans.
right. Denial. Yeah, because living in denial is to say, I'm not gonna deal with what's gonna happen, or I'm just not gonna think about it. And that's as bad as being overwhelmed by it, right? Um, it's again, you're not living with clarity. You're not because sometimes clarity, sometimes we don't want to be clear because we don't want to see how awful it is. But from my experience, facing the awfulness of it is usually a better plan. It usually works better for me, at least, than having a constant sense of dread about what it might be. But I can't turn my face to look at it because it seems too terrible. Um, I think again, clarity, calm, presence can't hurt. All right, good. Well, have we? I don't know that we've reached a conclusion beyond our own sense that we both have that this tool, however you use it, is something you should try. And it's
Yeah,
also something that you should try not only in times of trauma, but you should make. I mean, we all have healing to do all the time, and so I think having this as a part of what you do every day, having some time to be present, to be conscious, is really good. So don't wait for a cataclysm, but just try and be present in your day right now and use your art to do that. Let's start there.
I think that's that's wise. And remember what we are saying earlier. It as Mary Oliver says, you do not have to be good, right? Um, you just have to start, use the tools, um, and maybe just sort of be a little scientist with it. Just sort of see what happens if you try, and pay attention to that. How does as I sit here, I'm going to draw that tangle of tubes, and just notice, and if that works, do it again, maybe in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is like sometimes the particular tool you have isn't doing it for you. That isn't to say that picking up a brush or picking up a squishy marker or a box of crayons might not be better. Try some other stuff. If at first it feels like the medium is getting in the way of your clarity, that can happen.
Mhm.
Sometimes I find drawing with a very fine pen helps me, but at other times it's the wrong kind of thinking and seeing, and I want to be broader and more expressive and free flowing, and I need to use a big chunky marker or a brush. See what happens. Yeah. It's great. I mean, it's a great thing to have in your life. I think that that's hopefully
I agree.
the
I
conclusion
agree.
that you'll come from our 24 hours of talking about art on this podcast is making art a regular
We
part of
like
your
art.
life. Yeah. It's like, it's a great thing. It's something that we both enjoy. I think to myself, I'm a, like, I'm certainly a calmer person. I'm a happier person than I was 20 years ago when I didn't do this stuff. So it's worked for me. Um, and, I think it can work for anybody.
Yeah, and a critical that it can work for you, and just sort of remember it's not about that pretty picture.
Right.
It's about just engaging with this process and letting your brain have another outlet. And that outlet ends up being something that you can look down at and see what just happened. And it will it will allow your brain to fall into rhythms and patterns that it otherwise wouldn't. And our experience and the kind of experience of many other people is that process for its own sake, completely independent of whatever comes out on the paper, is useful and and calming, helps us focus, and is I I I think a powerful tool for healing.
I agree. Well, let's conclude there. I don't know how about you, but I felt like this has been a really fun experience over the last few months that we've been doing this, talking about art and science and life and stuff. And thanks so much, Jack, for being part of it with me.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Danny. This has been also a delight for me as well. I love playing with ideas, and this has just been a a playground for that. Um, so thank you for initiating this process, and your work and logistics on the back end to turn these into podcasts that can go get cast in the pod.
Exactly. I am if nothing else, a technical wizard. Not really. All right.
A technical prestidigitator.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's the term I've been looking for. Well, and with that, we leave you for now for the end of this season. We'll see what seasons there are in the future. Summer, fall, winter. We'll see. Thanks again, Jack.
Thank you so much.
This has been Art for All, the Sketchbook School podcast.